Summary of Pocahontas and the Powhatan Dilemma by Camilla Townsend. Camilla Townsend, a historian, writes Pocahontas and the Powhatan Dilemma to try to change the harmful, racist, and inaccurate cultural myths about Pocahontas, the Powhatan people, and the colonization of the Virginia Tidewater region, which the Algonquian-speaking tribes that lived there originally called Senecamoco. King James I of England sent the Virginia Company to Virginia in 1607. However, Townsend says that the past of both England and the New World is necessary to understand the complicated relationship between the English and the Native Americans. It wasn't a matter of physical strength or political smarts that the English eventually beat the area's native groups, according to Townsend. It was because the English had been sedentary and agriculturalist for thousands of years. Because of this way of life, they were able to focus on other areas of growth, like making weapons and metalwork. The Algonquian people, on the other hand, had only started farming 300 years before the settlers came. When the settlers came, they took away all of their chances to innovate or grow, even though they were skilled warriors and smart politicians who were just about to create a written language, a formal calendar, and weapons made of metal. A new nation was going to be built on the destruction of their people, Townsend writes. That destruction could be full or partial. Pocahontas is born around 1597 to Powhatan, who was the Mamanitoic, or supreme chief, of a group of Algonquian-speaking people that he had commanded throughout his life. A lot of the time, Pocahontas is wrongly called Powhatan's best child. Townsend, on the other hand, says Pocahontas is really the daughter of a commoner and wasn't very important to Powhatan politically in her early years. In the spring of 1607, when Pocahontas is about 9 years old, a group of Englishmen come to the Senecamoco region. They either paid for their trip or were forced to work to get to the New World and start a village at Jamestown. Opachenquino, the Werowance, chief of the Pamunkey tribe, captures Captain John Smith in December. Smith is a naval officer who has toured the world and written a lot about his sexy, and mostly made-up, adventures. What Opachenquino does is bring the man before Powhatan. He knows that the man is the Werowance of the newcomers to the bay. Another story about this first meeting between Powhatan and Smith is busted by Townsend, who says Powhatan never tried to kill Smith. Pocahontas also didn't throw herself over Smith's body while he was on the ground to save him, as is often said. Instead, Powhatan probably adopts Smith through a ceremony he has probably done hundreds of times before. This is a usual way for two groups to become loyal to each other. Powhatan asks for guns in exchange for food like corn and seeds, but Smith gives Powhatan heavy cannons instead because the owners of the Virginia Company told them not to give weapons to the natives. This makes Powhatan angry. Powhatan probably thinks about pulling off a coordinated attack on Jamestown to destroy it, but he chooses to try to trick the settlers into leaving on their own. In 1608, Powhatan sends Pocahontas to Jamestown to try to get back some prisoners because things are getting worse between the settlers and the Powhatan people. Again, Townsend busts the idea that Pocahontas was sent because either John Smith or Powhatan loved her very much. More likely, she was sent because, as a 10-year-old girl, she knows a lot more English than the adults in her group and is a good translator. With the help of 2 other interpreters, Pocahontas is able to make the deal. As things get better between them, she starts going to the colony more often to teach John Smith Algonquian and learn English from him. Smith, who is now president of Jamestown and in charge of a failing settlement, keeps asking the nearby tribes for corn and food, but he won't give Powhatan the weapons he wants. Powhatan and his people hide in the woods so that the settlers can't find them. Smith then starts raiding other towns because he is fed up with not being able to get the Algonquians to do what he wants. Smith leaves Jamestown in 1609, angry and hurt. People from 2 new ships come to Jamestown in 1610, but there are already less than 100 people living there. After saving the colonists, they start getting ready to leave the island. But as they sail downriver, they see that another fleet of ships with settlers and goods has arrived. This one is led by Lord de la Warr and Captain Samuel Argall, who is his second in command. In 1609, the The wealthy backers of the Virginia Company know that the colony at Jamestown is failing and needs more investors, workers, and care. They change the charter from a private venture to a public joint stock company. Many new settlers still go to the New World to find their wealth, even though they are scared of the violent stories they've heard and, as Townsend writes, may feel morally conflicted about taking land from the natives. John Rolfe is one of these guys. He is the son of a merchant and wants to make a name for himself in the New World. In 1609, Rolfe and his wife leave England, but their ship sinks in Bermuda. They finally make it to Jamestown as part of the fleet that arrives just before Lord de la Warr's. They decide to stay because they think that adding more people and food might help the group get better again. But throughout 1610, things get even worse between the Powhatan and the settlers, and killings happen all the time. Argall is less angry than other leaders, so he starts to use hostage-taking as a way to make peace with the Powhatan instead of as a punishment. In 1613, Argall learns about a valuable hostage who is living at a nearby Patawomeck village as Upas's guest. They are guests of the tribe's leader. Pocahontas is this person. She is on a formal visit to the people of her late husband Cacombe. She is at most 15 or 16 years old right now. Argall forces the chief to trick Pocahontas into getting on an English ship. Once she's on board, Argall takes her prisoner and brings her back to Jamestown. If the English give Pocahontas back to Powhatan, Argall says they can have anything they want in trade. But Argall knows how valuable the princess is and rushes her to Henrico, a new outpost up the river. It is here that she is put up in the house of Reverend Alexander Whitaker, who is keen to show that he can convert a lot of native people to Christianity. Whitaker starts to teach Pocahontas English and the King James Bible, and he brings her to his weekly talks at Jamestown. Pocahontas meets John Rolfe there. John, who is still sad about the death of his wife, falls deeply in love with the young woman. Townsend writes that Pocahontas talks to her father through agents during this time and that she and her father probably come up with a plan to stay with the English to try to make things better between them from the inside out. In April 1614, Pocahontas decides to become a Christian, change her name to Rebecca, and marry John Rolfe. Pocahontas moves in with Rolfe on his tobacco property and helps him come up with new ways to grow, farm, and dry the tobacco. This happened in 1616. Pocahontas, John Rolfe, their young son Thomas, Captain Argall, Ottamatamakin, Powhatan's advisor, and a few other native servants, some of whom were Pocahontas's relatives, were invited to go to London to be hosted at court and meet the wealthy backers of the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company wants to get people talking, get news, and gain political support by bringing in an Indian woman who has been converted and her husband to show off around town. In London, John Rolfe and Pocahontas are taken in by Sir Edwin Sandys, a member of Parliament and a well-known investor in the company. He gives them money for their trip and looks after them. Townsend writes that Pocahontas and her family members are probably feeling down because they arrive in London and see that it is a busy city with 200,000 people. It is clear that many of these people will soon be leaving for the New World. Even though she was tired and sick from foreign microbes that she wasn't immune to, Pocahontas went to events at King James I's court, posed for a picture by the famous Dutch-German artist Simon van de Passé, and even ran into John Smith again. She goes on a long rant about how Smith betrayed her father, killed her people, and called people he should have honored strangers. Rolfe, Pocahontas, and the rest of their group got ready to sail back to Virginia in March 1617. While they were stopping in Gravesend, Pocahontas finally gives up because she is sick. Many of her fellow travelers are also too sick to make it back home. Rolfe buries Pocahontas and leaves their young son with a vice-admiral. He then goes back to Virginia and finds Jamestown in a pitiful state. Still, Rolfe is ready to do what his boss, Sandys, wants him to do, so he starts to try to get a school built for local children where they can learn English and become Christians. In his letters to Sandys, Rolfe exaggerates how willing the tribes were to give up their children. In reality, things are worse between the settlers and the natives than ever before, and Ottamatamakin's bad report to Opechenekino, now Powhatan's top military officer, makes the Indians think they don't have much time left to get the settlers to leave their land. The Powhatan people attack Jamestown in 1622, right after Rolfe's death. They kill a quarter of the colony's population on the anniversary of Powhatan's death and Pocahontas's funeral, which Townsend says is probably just a coincidence but is still symbolic. When the Virginia Company hears about the attack, they tell the residents they can stop trying to make peace with the nearby tribes and just kill them. All-out war between the colonists and the Powhatan ends any doubts about who will rule the Tsinakamoko. Warlords and leaders of the local tribes, like Queen Cococoesque of the Pamunkey, continue to fight against the colonists. But by 1677, the leaders of all the major tribes were forced to sign peace deals giving up their lands. Townsend says that the stories that have grown up around people like Pocahontas and Cococoesque hurt them because their bravery is a kind of real-life heroism that you don't find in epic tales.
About the author. Camilla Townsend was born and raised in New York. She graduated from Bryn Mawr College and then lived and worked in Latin America before choosing to go to Rutgers University to get her PhD in comparative history. In the 1990s and early 2000s, she taught at Colgate University in Hamilton, New York. It was there that she wrote some of her most famous academic works, such as Tales of Two Cities, Race and Economic Culture in Early Republican North and South America, 2000, and Pocahontas and the Powhatan Dilemma, 2005. In 2010, the Guggenheim Foundation gave Townsend a very important grant. She is now a professor at Rutgers, where she went to school, and has continued to write a lot in the areas of early Native American and Latin American history. A lot of her work is about the relationships between Native Americans and Europeans in the Americas in the early days of American history. Findings from letters, diaries, papers, and books written by both settlers and native peoples are used in her work. The lives of the people who wrote these letters are put in new contexts and new ideas are created.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.